Foulborn unique items are having a large impact on what's being played in Path of Exile 3.27, and a lot of that comes down to just how incredibly different some of the unique items become when a single modifier is replaced with a new one, which is often a stat that enables a new kind of build that previously may have had no synergy at all with that type of item. A good example of that is the Foulborn version of Wrathpith Globe, that a lot of people are currently using to create life-stacking damage over time builds, including some that use Ignite or Bleed attack-based setups, which is something that would have never really been a thing outside of that modifier change. Now, in my last video, I went over some Foulborn uniques and their tech that you can use in different builds, and in this one I'll cover even more of those items. But first, I want to highlight something that was brought to my attention in the last video by some commenters, so thanks if you made a comment on this. And that is that there are actually some Foulborn modifiers that can appear on items, even though they're not shown here on poedb's list. And that's in regards to breach-specific items, and that's because of the old breach system. So the way our breach items used to work is that you would have a base item that could drop, and then you would upgrade it via a breach blessing. For example, Zoph's Heart could be upgraded into Zoph's Blood using a Blessing of Zoph. Well, because of that system, there are some modifiers that exist on both items. For example, on Zoph's Heart you have the 20 to 40% fire resistance, and on Zoph's Blood, that modifier still exists. Now, those items are linked in that kind of old upgrade process, and that means that in the current league, in 3.27, you can actually get a Zoph's Blood with this modifier right here. Even though it's not shown on this list here, that actually exists in the game, and that means that theoretically you can actually get Zoph's Blood with Elemental Overload and the Fizz taken as fire modifier together, and you can actually see that on trade it's possible to get the item. And the same can be said here for the Halcyon and the Pandemonius. The Halcyon there has the 35 to 40% to cold resistance modifier, and then the Pandemonius still has that modifier, and they're kind of linked in that old upgrade system, which means that this 5 to 15% of physical damage from hits taken as cold damage modifier can actually be obtained on the Pandemonius. So there's some more options there if you're looking for that Fizz taken as stacking setup. You can actually use Zoph's Blood, or you can use the Pandemonius instead of those other two amulets, and they provide some different stats there that you can get, so perhaps they work on different builds. Now, I haven't actually looked into this to see if there's more breach uniques that have the same kind of thing going on here, where you can obtain a modifier which is not shown on this list, but it's likely that that's a thing if there are shared modifiers. Now let's get into it, beginning with Midnight Bargain. Now this is one that's just not used at all anymore because of this modifier right here. Reserves 30% of life and cannot be used with Chaos Inoculation. Both of these modifiers are just ridiculously punishing for the upsides that you get from this. You know, you can't use Chaos Inoculation, so you can't do any kind of energy shield based setup, and reserves 30% of life is incredibly punishing from a defensive perspective. So this modifier can actually be removed wholly, so both of these lines here can be removed, and they get replaced with a modifier that actually makes you lose 0.5% of life and energy shield per minion summoned, which is quite punishing in its own right, especially if you have a lot of minions, but it's a modifier that you can actually overcome, whereas, you know, this one here is not really a thing that you can do much about at all. So I wanted to highlight this one, not particularly because of that in and of itself, but more so because the Midnight Bargain also has another Foulborn modifier, which is replacing the +1 to maximum number of raised zombies, skeletons, and spectres with +2 maximum number of summoned golems. Now, the reason why I want to highlight that is because of the existence of the Dark Monarch, which is a helmet that kind of rolls a random minion type, and that minion type that it rolls is then having its maximum number of summoned minions doubled. You cannot have other minions when you actually use this helmet, you can only use that particular type, but on this list is summoned golems. So you can actually use the Midnight Bargain to gain +2 maximum number of summoned golems, then you can use the Dark Monarch to double your maximum golem limit, and obviously there's loads of other ways to get maximum golems as well, but that is a really interesting setup for a Golemancer. Now, you do need to overcome that downside of losing life and energy shield over time whilst you actually have those minions summoned. So notably, you can use it with Chaos Inoculation, even though it says that you lose 0.5% of your life per second. The way that works is that you do actually lose a percentage of 1 life per second, and once that actually ticks up to enough to make you lose a whole 1 life, you will then die. So you need some kind of recovery if you're doing that, so that you never die from that life loss. But I think more notably is that just using this in a normal setup, now that you don't need to reserve any life, you can find ways to recover your life with, regeneration, or you could look into something like Eternal Youth, for example, is one way that you could look at recovering your life, and you could use that in combination with something like Dissolution and Petrified Blood. There's a lot of different options that you could do there with that setup. But I wanted to just highlight this because I think that's a really interesting option there for Golem monsters. You can just get so many golems, but you must overcome that downside. Now next up we have the Warped Timepiece, which is an amulet that's actually become a lot more useful in this patch compared to previous patches. Now the Warped Timepiece has this one modifier right here, debuffs on you expire 100% faster. Let's quickly touch on that first before we get to the Foulborn version of this item. Now in this patch, the Beacon of Madness boots were changed, and the way these boots work is they provide you this skill, level 1 Embrace Madness, and Embrace Madness is basically a skill that has nothing but downsides in and of itself. It just applies a constant array of debuffs onto you. It used to be every second, and now in this patch it's been changed to every 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds you get a new debuff applied to you, and it picks from 4 different debuffs. And each debuff lasts 20 seconds, and they're really bad, right? You have things like reduced action speed, increased damage taken, reduced recovery, and things like this. All of these debuffs are terrible to have, and some of them are very hard to deal with. And so the Warp Timepiece has become an item that's actually quite useful this patch in combination with Beacon of Madness, because this is one of the largest sources of this particular stat here. Debuffs on you expire 100% faster. If you stack this stat up quite a lot, you're able to make it so that the Beacon of Madness debuffs that are being applied to you have less and less chance to actually be reapplied, and therefore they don't continuously stack up, they actually get removed, and then, they have a lower average stack count in general, and that means that the downside of actually having this skill active on you is not fully negated, but mostly negated. And once you actually have that, you can then benefit from the upside. The upside is whatever these modifiers provide. Now, there's 3 different types of the Beacon of Madness boots, but I want to talk about one particular type with this Foulborn version of the Warp Timepiece, and that's this one right here. All damage inflicts poison while affected by Glorious Madness. Now, this modifier, unlike the Assassin's new notable, which is all damage can poison, this one is all damage inflicts poison. It means you don't need to invest into poison chance at all, and it means that all of your elemental damage can also poison alongside your chaos and physical damage. So this is a really strong modifier, very, very powerful, and it's enabled by having this skill up all the time. So that means you can combine these boots with Warped Timepiece. And the Foulborn version of the Warped Timepiece has a modifier that grants you up to 30% increased effect of temporal chains. Now, 30% increased effect is a massive number in regards to the effect of curses. Usually you find sort of, 5-10% curse effect, 30% is a lot, and Temporal Chains has a lot of really good upsides for a poison build. Obviously, you're going to be able to slow monsters down, which is something that poison builds typically don't have that much access to. You're not usually going to be, chilling and things like that. So this is going to be scaled up against a boss. You're going to be reaching up to maybe 24-25% less action speed just from this curse alone. And then you have this stat right here. Other effects on curse enemies expire 25% slower. Now, this thing being scaled up by that 30% increased curse effect and then any other curse effect modifiers you have means that your poisons are going to last artificially longer on monsters, and that is just really good in combination with a typical poison build setup that you want, where you just apply lots and lots of poisons with long durations. So that is a really nice combination you can utilize this league with the Foulborn version of the Warp Timepiece and that version of Beacon of Madness. Next up is Kiloava's Bluster, which is a shield that was introduced back in the Trial of the Ancestors, and this is an interesting shield. It gives you a chance for your elemental resistances to be counted as being 90% against enemy hits. The problem with this modifier is that when it doesn't proc, it's completely useless, and obviously having defenses that are not reliable is not very ideal. And in 3.27, you can actually obtain a Foulborn version of this item that replaces this stat with a fully offensive modifier that provides up to 25% chance to invert monster elemental resistances. Now, that is a very strong stat. You'll remember that that used to exist as a mastery on the elemental wheel, and that was actually nerfed down to 15%. And the way that modifier works is that, let's say you're attacking a boss that has 50% resistances, well, 25% of the time when you actually attack that boss there, their resistances will be treated as minus 50%. And that means that in isolation, 3 out of 4 times you're going to be dealing half damage, and then 1 out of 4 times you're dealing 3 times damage. Which means that on average, this is a 50% more damage multiplier in a vacuum. Now, in a normal build, you're going to have things like penetration, and you might have access to the mastery and things like that, so this probably won't work out at 50% more damage, but it's going to still be a very strong damage modifier that you can utilize there for those types of builds. And this shield, in and of itself, isn't actually that bad, the other modifiers that it provides. It gives a decent amount of evasion and block chance there, and it also provides a chance to avoid elemental ailments that you can stack up with Eldritch Implicits on your boots and modifiers on your boots, to be able to actually reach 100% of that stat, and that's really nice once you actually have full ailment immunity. Now let's move on to another shield, the Oppressor, and this one was posted on the Reddit I think pretty early on, but I just want to highlight how good this item is in this patch, because the Oppressor is actually a meme item. Some people don't really know about this, but basically the Oppressor was added to the game for the sole purpose of blocking the acquisition of the Squire. Now the Squire is a very powerful shield, obviously, and the idea there was that when this item was first added to the game, it would have been the only elegant round shield unique item, and so they wanted to add another elegant round shield that was very common and kind of blocked you from getting this based on those acquisition methods such as, you know, Orb of Chance, Tainted Mythic Orb, and even things like Trash to Treasure and the Omen and stuff like that. So the Oppressor was made to be deliberately quite bad. The idea of this shield is that it kind of tries to do everything, right? It gives you a bit of block there, gives you a lot of block actually, up to 38%, and then there's a large chance to suppress spell damage as well, but in doing so, it makes both of those defensive methods worse for you overall. You know, you take 20% of damage from blocked hits, and you also have minus 10% the amount of suppressed spell damage prevented. But in the current league, you can actually get an Oppressor that has none of these downsides. This is one of the strongest Foulborn items in the game, I think. It's absolutely ridiculous. You can replace this minus 10% to amount of suppressed spell damage prevented with a modifier that grants up to 15% chance to avoid damage from hits. And then you can replace the take 20% from damage from blocked hits with a modifier that provides up to 30% chance to block spell damage. So this just becomes a ridiculously strong defensive shield. You get a lot more spell suppression chance than you would from a max, tier 1 roll on a normal rare shield. And you also get that huge amount of block, up to 38% chance for attack block, up to 30% spell block. This is definitely one of the strongest defensive shields that you can get in the game now, even though it doesn't have things like recover on block on there. The idea that you can get so much block chance and spell suppression chance from one item is kind of crazy. Next up, we have the Hand of Wisdom and Action and the Hand of Thought and Motion. 2 different unique claws there that are kind of linked in the old Breach expansions there that you kind of upgrade between the two. But both of those items have 2 different modifiers that can be replaced with increased strength in this patch, which means you can have a claw that has increased dexterity, increased strength, and increased intelligence. All can roll up to 12%. So there's a lot of potential there in this league for tri-attribute stacking, along with the Cyclopean Coil there for 1% increased damage per 5 of your lowest attribute, and then you can also use the Attributes Mastery for the same stat once again. And that is just really, really strong potential there for those super late game stat stacking builds. I'm sure Captain Lance will be looking at that one, licking his lips. But that's going to be it for this one. Again, I don't want the video going too long, but I'll likely do another one of these for more Foulborn uniques because there are just so many interesting options in the game right now for lots of different builds. But thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.